Michael Jackson was driving down the Ventura Freeway in 1982 when a kid on a motorcycle pulled up alongside his Rolls-Royce. The kid was yelling. Jackson didn't understand why. He had been so deep inside a melody circling his head that the world around him had ceased to exist. Then he saw the smoke. The entire bottom of the car was on fire. Not smoldering. On fire. He pulled over. He got out. He waited for help. And the entire time, even as he watched his car burn on the side of the highway, he kept mentally composing the song. That's how absorbed he was. That's how certain he was. The song that almost killed him before anyone ever heard a note of it was called Billie Jean. Here's what you probably don't know. The car fire was only the first time this song nearly didn't make it. What happened next? Inside the studio, between two of the most powerful men in music, almost buried it for good. The Thriller sessions ran from April to November 1982 at Westlake Recording Studios in Los Angeles. Michael Jackson was 24 years old. He had already been a recording artist for over a decade. He had sung professionally since he was a child, had toured relentlessly with his brothers throughout the 1970s, and had released Off the Wall in 1979, an album that critics praised as a landmark and that sold more than 20 million copies worldwide. He was not a newcomer. He was not someone who needed to be told how the music industry worked. He knew what a hit felt like. Not as intuition, not as hope, but as physical certainty. He described it in his autobiography Moonwalk. A musician knows hit material. It has to feel right. Everything has to feel in place. It fulfills you and it makes you feel good. You know it when you hear it. He knew it about Billie Jean. He was sure enough to nearly die for it on a freeway. Quincy Jones was not sure at all. Quincy Jones was not a man who doubted himself professionally. By 1982, he had produced Frank Sinatra. He had arranged for Count Basie and Ray Charles. He had worked with Ella Fitzgerald, Aretha Franklin, and dozens of others across 4 decades. He had won Grammy Awards. He had scored Hollywood films. He had spent his entire adult life in rooms where the most talented musicians alive were making the most ambitious music they could, and he had consistently been the one those musicians trusted to make it better. He had also produced Off the Wall with Michael Jackson in 1979. He understood popular music the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Not just the surface, but the structure underneath. So when Michael brought him the demo for Billie Jean and Jones's first reaction was that it didn't belong on the album, that was not a casual opinion. It was a professional verdict from someone who had earned the right to deliver one. Have you ever felt that certainty? That something you made was right? And had someone you trusted tell you that you were wrong? Not gently. Not diplomatically. Directly. Jones didn't hide his reaction. He told people later that when he heard the demo, he thought Michael had lost his mind. There were 3 specific problems. Jones didn't like the bass line. He felt it was too heavy, too sparse, structurally uninteresting for a pop record. He didn't like the title. He was afraid listeners would confuse Billie Jean with the famous tennis champion Billie Jean King, and the association would undercut the song's meaning before anyone heard the first verse. He had a specific replacement title ready, Not My Lover. And then there was the intro. 29 seconds of bass and drums before a single word was sung. In 1982, radio programmers cut songs down to 4 minutes if they were lucky. A 29-second intro was, in Jones's words, so long you could shave during it. He wanted it gone. Michael said no on every single count. The timeline matters more than anything else here. This wasn't a polite creative disagreement between equals who agreed to sleep on it. Jackson was a young artist in his mid-20s. Jones was a legend with decades of credibility behind him. The structural power in that room tilted heavily in one direction. Most people, most artists, would have made some concession. Changed the title, at least. Trimmed 30 seconds off the front. Given something to the man who controlled the production. You don't win arguments with Quincy Jones by simply refusing to move. Michael gave nothing. He didn't negotiate. He didn't offer a counterproposal. He held every position completely. What would you have done in that room? Keep that question in mind as we go further. Because what happened next reveals something about how Billie Jean actually became what it became. And it has nothing to do with talent or luck. Jones eventually consented to keep the intro. He didn't do it because he changed his mind about radio programming. He didn't do it because he ran focus groups or consulted with other producers. He did it because of one sentence. Michael Jackson looked at him and said, "But that's the jelly. That's what makes me want to dance." Jones recalled the moment years later. When Michael Jackson tells you, "That's what makes me want to dance," well, the rest of us just have to shut up. Read that again. One sentence. No argument. No data. No precedent. Just the pure instinct of a 24-year-old who trusted his own body's response to a piece of music more than the professional consensus of one of the most respected producers alive. And Jones surrendered. Not reluctantly, either. He surrendered in the way that only someone who genuinely loves music can, because Michael's answer was better than any counterargument Jones could have constructed. You can cite radio metrics. You can cite average listener drop-off rates. You can cite 15 years of industry experience. And then someone tells you that those 29 seconds are the reason they need to move, and all of it becomes beside the point. But the battle over the song wasn't finished. The dispute over the title, Billie Jean versus Not My Lover, dragged on longer. Jones's concern wasn't irrational. Billie Jean King was genuinely famous in 1982, a household name, the most celebrated female tennis player in American history. She had fought a headline battle with Bobby Riggs in 1973, the so-called Battle of the Sexes. That was watched by 90 million people worldwide. Her name carried enormous cultural weight that had nothing to do with Michael Jackson. The potential for confusion was real. If casual listeners heard the title and made the wrong association, the song's personal meaning, a woman falsely claiming Michael was the father of her child, would dissolve before they ever reached the chorus. Not My Lover was the safer, cleaner, more defensible choice. Michael refused it anyway. The song was called what it was called because that was what he heard when he wrote it. He wrote it, he would later explain, because the situation it described was real. Groupies had made similar claims about his brothers throughout the Jackson 5 years. Then in 1981, a woman had written him a series of letters claiming he had fathered her twins. The situation escalated until she mailed him a package containing a gun. Billie Jean wasn't a fictional character. She was a composite of something he had lived with his entire career. You don't rename that. You don't soften it for radio. Who do you think was really in control here? The man with the production credit or the man with the song? The recording itself produced its own extraordinary episode. Engineer Bruce Sweetian mixed Billie Jean 91 times. He normally mixes a track once, maybe twice. He kept going because each iteration seemed to uncover something or to lose something else, and he couldn't locate the version that felt final. The mixes accumulated, 91 of them. And after all of that, all the hours, all the attempts, all the incremental adjustments, Jones pulled the second mix. Mix number 2 out of 91 was the one that ended up on Thriller. The one you know. The one that has been played billions of times. Michael himself recorded the lead vocal in a single take. One pass. While Sweetian was still building the track through dozens of iterations, Michael stepped up to the microphone, sang the song from beginning to end, and walked away. It was finished almost before it started. There's a detail in the next section that almost nobody has reported, and it has nothing to do with the studio. On January 3, 1983, Billie Jean was released as the second single from Thriller. Within weeks, it was #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it would stay for 7 weeks. The album had already been out for over a month. Sales were accelerating at a rate that was beginning to alarm even the people who had predicted the album would be successful. Every chart, every sales figure, every radio metric pointed in the same direction. Thriller was becoming something the industry didn't have a category for. And then Michael Jackson's record label received a message that was not a business inquiry. It was a refusal. MTV launched in August 1981 with a famous declaration: "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll." The channel's programming was built around that identity. Guitar-driven, demographically targeted at suburban teenagers who had been told that rock music was their inheritance. By early 1983, the channel was 18 months old and reaching millions of households across the country. It had become the most powerful promotional vehicle for music videos in existence. A song in heavy rotation on MTV could double its sales figures within weeks. A song not in rotation on MTV was functionally invisible to an enormous portion of the record-buying public, and it would not play Billie Jean. MTV executives told CBS Records the song didn't fit their format. They had a word for that. The word was format.
Stop. That's not what it was.
The channel's playlist at that moment was, by one reporter's later estimate, 99% white. Several black artists had technically appeared. The Specials, Tina Turner, Musical Youth. But none in heavy rotation, none in the consistent presence that turned a hit into a phenomenon. Billie Jean was already #1. It was already one of the best-selling singles in the country. Radio stations were playing it constantly. Its album was on track to become the best-selling record in history. And it was sitting outside MTV's door because the executives had decided that their audience wasn't interested in music made by black artists. That is not a format decision. That is not a programming philosophy. That is something else, and the executives knew what it was. And they called it format anyway. Walter Yetnikoff was the president of CBS Records. He was known in the industry for many things, but subtlety was not one of them. When he found out what MTV had decided, he called the channel's leadership directly and delivered a message without diplomatic cushioning. His exact words, later recalled in interviews and documented in multiple accounts: "I'm pulling everything we have off the air, all our product. I'm not going to give you any more videos, and I'm going to go public and tell them about the fact you don't want to play music by a black guy." CBS Records at that point had some of the most commercially dominant artists in the country on its roster. Pulling them from MTV would have been a catastrophe for the channel. The threat worked. On March 10, 1983, more than 2 months after the single's release, after it had already spent weeks at #1, MTV added Billie Jean to rotation. Within weeks, it was in heavy rotation. Michael Jackson became the first black artist the channel featured that way. MTV scored its first quarterly profit in 1984, the year Billie Jean, Beat It, and Thriller were cresting. The Jackson estate said it plainly after Yetnikoff died in 2021. He had played corporate chicken with a powerful institution, and he won, and the floodgates opened. Did the media cover any of this at the time? The chart numbers, yes. The phenomenon, yes. The mechanism. What it actually took, the specific threat, the 2 months of refusal while a #1 song sat outside the door. That part received far less attention than it deserved. How much of this did the news actually report at the time? There is a version of this story. The version most people carry. in which Billie Jean was inevitable. Michael Jackson wrote it, Quincy Jones produced it, it came out, and it changed everything. That version is cleaner. It fits the mythology of genius. The right person makes the right thing at the right moment, and the world responds accordingly. The problem with that version is that it isn't true. Billie Jean was nearly cut from the album by the man producing it. Its title was nearly changed. Its most distinctive feature, that 29-second intro, the element that creates the tension the entire song depends on, was nearly gone. Then, after surviving all of that, the song reached #1 in the country and was still refused airplay by the most important music video platform of the era. Every stage of this song's life involved someone with institutional power deciding it wasn't right. Every stage required something, or someone, to push through anyway. The song survived its own creation by the narrowest possible margins, and at no point was its survival guaranteed by anything except Michael Jackson's refusal to concede. That is not a small omission from the standard telling. Two things can both be true. Quincy Jones was one of the greatest producers in the history of recorded music, and he was wrong about Billie Jean. Both of those statements are accurate. Jones knew how radio worked in 1982, and he was right that a 29-second intro was unconventional. He was also wrong about what that unconventionality would do. He was right that Billie Jean King was famous. He was also wrong that the association would matter. His professional expertise and his instincts were in genuine tension with Michael Jackson's instincts, and Michael's instincts were correct. Jones understood this eventually. He has said so publicly. He recalled giving up the argument about the intro not because he was beaten, but because the answer he received was better than the question he was asking. You can argue about radio. You can't argue with someone who tells you the music makes them need to move. The song was performed live for the first time on national television on March 25, 1983. The Motown 25 Anniversary Special, taped at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium and broadcast on NBC in May. The show was meant to celebrate 25 years of Motown Records. Jackson performed a medley with his brothers first, then stepped to the front of the stage alone. He wore a black fedora, a black sequin jacket, high-water pants, white socks, and one rhinestone glove. During the bridge of Billie Jean, he slid backward across the stage in a motion that appeared to defy the basic mechanics of human movement. The audience screamed before they understood what they had seen. Fred Astaire, one of the greatest dancers who ever lived, called him the next morning. "You're a hell of a mover," Astaire told him. Sammy Davis Jr. watched from the audience and reportedly wept. Michael Jackson was 24 years old. The performance was later named by Entertainment Weekly as one of the most important pop culture moments in history. Does this change how you see what happened? Not the story of a genius who made something great, but the story of how many times that thing almost didn't exist and what it took to keep it alive. Go back to the Ventura Freeway. A Rolls Royce on fire on the side of the road. A 24-year-old sitting beside it still composing. The car is gone. The song is still in his head. That is the whole story, right there. Not as a romantic detail, but as a structural fact. The song existed before anyone else agreed it should. It existed before the producer accepted it. Before the title was settled. Before the intro was spared. Before the channel agreed to play it. Billie Jean was already finished the moment Michael Jackson heard it in his own mind on that freeway. Everything that followed, the arguments, the 91 mixes, the threats, the phone call Yetnikoff made to MTV, the negotiations that nobody reported at the time, was just the rest of the world catching up. Every institution that tried to stop it failed. Not because they were weak, but because the song was already done before they had a chance to weigh in. The album it almost wasn't on became the best-selling album in recorded history. The intro that was supposed to be cut is the first thing you hear. The title that was supposed to be changed is the only name anyone remembers. And the 29 seconds of bass and drums that Quincy Jones thought was radio suicide. That's the part that makes you want to dance. If you followed this story for years, what did I miss?